My name is Lewis Hauer. I'm with SVB. We'll dive straight in so we can cut to the chase. Super excited and pleased to have Avlok and Nikhil with us today. The title of this session is Rolling Funds, Solo Capitalists, Micro VCs, How is the Ecosystem Changing? Which certainly is a massive, massive mouthful. Lots going on. Nikhil, maybe I'll have you do the Twitter intro and talk a little bit about, as Avlok picks up on that, of the changing ecosystem, allow you to build and grow progressively over time. You've written a lot about, and you personally had kind of made some of that transition from large firm to individual. Kind of maybe talk about how a little bit of the broader ecosystem and where rolling funds fit in relation to that.
I've been in venture for the last decade. Was at Shasta Ventures for the last 8 years, and I'm now building a new venture firm. And as Lewis alluded to, have written a little bit about the ecosystem over the years. I think I wrote a piece last summer about the rise of solo capitalists and tried to define, what that set of people means in the ecosystem. And I defined it actually quite narrowly as a group of folks who have raised funds that are above 50 million in size, who are leading financing rounds, who are doing actually more than just seed investing, as a unique set of folks in the ecosystem today that actually didn't exist, 5-10 years ago. And it's really an evolution of, the micro angels, the micro VCs and the super angels who are writing bigger and bigger checks, are competing with brand name firms to lead rounds, who are joining boards. And so that was kind of the thesis behind that particular piece and behind the term solo capitalists. But I think, AngelList is one of the platforms that has really enabled that rise and has enabled the rise of many more investors in our ecosystem. And rolling funds are a very interesting, next evolution of the ecosystem, enabling folks, new managers or folks who've invested for a while to now raise capital on a quarterly basis. I've actually become an LP in a rolling fund. I am not doing a rolling fund myself, but I think for a number of folks, it's a very interesting option to be able to invest. And so, just excited about the innovation, and I think AngelList is frankly one of the reasons why we have so many individual investors in the ecosystem today.
Nikhil, maybe because you touched on it, I'm going to go a little bit off script for the time being, but you just said, I'm not going to do a rolling fund for my subsequent fund. You don't have to answer about your specific situation, but maybe unpack and talk a little bit about the space of how are people making that decision? Is it, I already have a Rolodex of a bunch of institutional LPs, so therefore I don't need to? Is it, I'm going to go bigger, smaller? Talk about some of the decision frameworks for why you would or would not use some of these new structures that are out there.
From my perspective, because I do come from an institutional investing background, because I have a track record, because I know institutional LPs, I actually have the ability to raise a traditional fund. Unfortunately, many folks don't. And so I think, for folks like me who can, with the traditional set of LPs, such as university endowments, family offices, funds of funds, the traditional structure is more known. And I think a lot of those folks still don't understand exactly how the rolling fund structure works, and are just less comfortable with it. But I think if you don't have the institutional track record, if you don't have connections with traditional institutional limited partners, the rolling fund concept is super interesting. My perception is that it's attracting a very different LP base than the traditional LP base in funds.
Nice. There's been some questions coming through the chat that I'll pick up on in a minute, but one quick a bit of a change of pace. We've been talking about kind of from an LP perspective, from an investor perspective. One of the benefits, and Nikhil, you touched on, because you came from a traditional fund, you've got more of a track record. What are you seeing, or as you talk about the different buckets of a micro fund, a solo GP, an angel? How important or critical is it that you have to be leading the round in order to claim that track record? What involvement or engagement do you have? How are people making some of that transition from, yeah, I've been super active, I'm in all these deals, but double clicking they were a follow-oner, not an actual leader in some of those scenarios?
Well, I think, so much of our industry still relies on, references on sort of beneath the surface. What did you actually do to find that company, to make that investment decision? What did you actually do to help the company? I do think one of the things, given how competitive the ecosystem is to figure out, how are you going to win over a founder when that founder has multiple potential sources of capital. And so I think as an investor, figuring out sort of where you spike on sourcing companies, on making investment decisions, on winning over founders and winning the right to invest, and on helping companies is the most important framework to have in your mind. And the more you can hone, each of those, the better off you'll be to ultimately raise institutional capital. And I do think there's certain transition points to your point, Lewis. The first time you actually lead a round is a big moment for any investor, and a big step up. To actually write a term sheet that a founder accepts, and to put the round, together, and your reputation is built on those types of moments. And unfortunately, you don't get to have that many of them before you get, judged, unless you have an infinite source of capital, which most people don't have.
How are you finding the other side of the equation, the founders are receiving, or is there any change in mindset of, oh, you have a rolling fund, I know you've got gates on quarters, but is there any change dynamic of availability of capital, follow on, kind of what is that conversation at the time of lead looking like now, different from what it was, 10 months, 11 months ago, before rolling funds were a thing?
I'll just say real quick, I think part of the reason all this is happening in the ecosystem is that founders are more amenable to individual investors than ever before, and get excited about individual investors and their brands more so than the name of the firm on the door and being interested in that brand. And so I think part of the rise of institutional investors, of rolling funds, of all these different things that we've discussed, is that founders are actually interested in it.
The rolling fund infrastructure has been built and designed more towards that fundraising process, as you mentioned already. What other tools, what other products need to be built? There's some questions of how is, it's a great kind of segue, because you talk about how Substack being built for people to develop their own editorial brand and voice. Kind of what other tools either are you seeing that are very interesting in this early stage ecosystem, or do you think still need to come online in order to continue to change the face of the early stage ecosystem? Nikhil, how do you were talking about before of, in order to develop that, whether you're leading or not, but kind of what makes it unique? How are you bringing something differentiated to that conversation with founders? How do you think about the new tools? Is it around that collaboration element? Is it something different as you see this space evolving?
I think there's a lot of opportunity for just making our ecosystem more transparent. Enabling founders to raise, in a more productive fashion. Part of my reflection on the ecosystem right now is rounds are happening faster than ever, and it actually scares me. I feel like on both sides, founders aren't taking enough time to understand more about their investors, to learn more about how they work, and investors are probably not doing enough diligence to figure out, is this a commitment that they want to make for a really long period of time? Because these marriages end up being, in some cases, over a decade long. And so one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how do we, yes, the time has compressed, but I feel like the getting to know you part is still incredibly important, and the fit is incredibly important. And so a sort of dream set of tools for me would be to try to tease that out in a more productive fashion, because I do think these are incredibly important relationships to sort of build and to understand on both sides.
I know we are at noon. As I said in our email intro, we could go on for hours about this, I'm sure. Any quick parting final thoughts, prompts? Stay tuned to AngelList for what's to come. Nikhil, read your Substack. Any final thoughts before we jump?
So first of all, I think the more capital in the ecosystem is beneficial to founders. I mean, my hope is that more talented people, get companies off the ground as a result of all of these different options being out there. And I think overall that's a good thing. I do think with founders that have choice, being really thoughtful about who you work with is very, very important. And so, that's the kind of drumbeat that I've been on for a while and that I'll continue to be on. I think it should also be acknowledged that early stage investing is really hard. I mean, most venture funds don't end up returning all the capital that they raised. And so we have been in a very unique environment for the last 10 years, but I think it's also important to call out that, this isn't and shouldn't be for everyone. And I do worry what happens, the next time we do have some sort of a downturn.
Thank you, everyone in the audience. Go join the other sessions and ping us all, follow us all. I'm sure we all are happy to chat more about this topic.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.